Our house had a troubled past, a dark history filled with tragedy and violence. Numerous deaths had occurred there long before my family moved in. Most recently, the previous tenants left abruptly after their son took his own life in that very home. Before that, there were whispers of murder, though the details remained murky, shared only in hushed tones by the landlords. When my mom met my stepdad, they decided to settle down there. I was young then, so it all seemed like just another house. But everything changed when my baby sister was born. That's when things started to go wrong. The house only had 2 bedrooms, so I had to share a room with my baby sister, who we'll call B. B never stopped crying. At first, I thought it was just a baby thing, but her cries seemed different, like she was scared. One night, after what felt like hours of her wailing, she suddenly went silent. I glanced over, hoping she'd finally fallen asleep, but instead, I saw something that made my heart stop. A dark, shadowy figure hovered over her crib, moving in slow, airy motions. Paralyzed with fear, I hid under my covers, squeezing my eyes shut until exhaustion finally pulled me to sleep. The next morning, I told my parents about the shadowy figure, but they brushed it off, saying it was just my imagination. Yet, night after night, I kept seeing it, always beside B's crib, never anywhere else in the room. It became a haunting presence that wouldn't leave. After a while, my parents let me sleep in their room. I stayed with my mom while my stepdad took my place in my old room. I thought that would be the end of it, but things only got worse. Shortly after I began seeing the figure, my stepdad lost his job. He was a hard worker, so his sudden unemployment shocked my mom. He fell into a deep depression, spending his days slouched on the couch, eyes fixed on the TV. One afternoon, I came home from school to find him sitting there, staring blankly ahead. Behind him, the dark figure loomed silently, watching. I felt an overwhelming dread. I couldn't hold back my tears, and when he noticed, he tried to comfort me. But I was too frightened to explain what I'd seen. Over the following weeks, the figure began appearing more frequently. It seemed drawn to B and my stepdad, lingering near them both as if feeding off their sadness. At night, in the silence of our shared room, I would hear a woman's voice softly whispering to B. I couldn't make out the words, but the voice was soothing, almost loving. As B grew older, she started talking back, calling the voice her friend. My parents thought it was just an imaginary friend, a harmless phase, but I knew better. This wasn't a friend, it was something else. The atmosphere in the house became unbearable. B seemed trapped in a loop, growing increasingly withdrawn. My mom, once calm and caring, was filled with anger, and my stepdad's depression deepened. I felt isolated, invisible to everyone around me. The fighting between my parents grew more violent, their shouts piercing the thin walls at night. One evening, as I lay in bed, I heard my stepdad beg my mom to put the knife down. I couldn't tell if he was serious, but the terror in his voice told me that things were spiraling out of control. One evening, I stayed up in the living room watching TV. It wasn't too late, around 8:30 p.m. My stepdad had fallen asleep on the couch, and my mom was in her room, exhausted. When I turned off the TV and headed upstairs, I heard whispering coming from my room. I froze, hearing B's voice softly responding to whatever or whoever was speaking to her. The door was slightly ajar, and I crept closer, peeking through the crack. What I saw made my blood run cold. B stood beside the dark figure, her small hand reaching up toward it, as if she were being led somewhere. I screamed, and the door instantly slammed shut. Panicked, I kept screaming until my mom burst out of her room. I couldn't speak, only point at the door. She tried to open it, but it was locked, though B was too small to reach the doorknob. After some struggling, My mom managed to force the door open, only to find me standing in the corner, facing the wall, completely unresponsive. From that night on, a deep, dark sadness settled over me, a shadow that I couldn't shake. The strange figure seemed to notice. It would hover near my bed on nights when I felt particularly lonely. Somehow it felt comforting, like I wasn't completely alone. But the comfort was twisted, a reminder of something sinister that lurked in every shadow of our home. Eventually, my mom had had enough. She decided we needed to leave. We packed up quickly, and as we left for my grandparents' house, I glanced back at the doorway. There, standing beside my stepdad, was the figure watching us go. I felt a pang of sadness, not just for him but for the darkness that seemed to consume him. I knew he wouldn't be alone. Although it happened quite some time ago, I'm still haunted by this experience. Around September of last year, I spent the night at my grandparents' home. The evening seemed to be going relatively normal. We ate my grandmother's delicious steak, watched TV, and looked at some old photos. When night came, I went to the guest bedroom, which had once been my room back when I used to live with them. Around 2 in the morning, I put on some music from my laptop as I got ready for bed, hoping it would help me drift off. Now, let me tell you, there had been a few strange occurrences when I used to live there, but none were terrifying enough to really scare me. For instance, I've always been a light sleeper, often waking up if someone so much as walked quietly on the wooden floors outside my room. This had happened a few times before, with me waking up to soft footsteps in the hallway. But each time, my grandparents would assure me they hadn't been up at all. Once, I even went to check, only to find all the doors closed and everyone seemingly asleep. The layout of my room was peculiar. There was a corner that led to a short hallway before reaching the door, so from the bed, I couldn't see the entrance, just the small hallway leading to it. I must have fallen asleep quickly that night because I woke up suddenly around 4 in the morning, feeling inexplicably tired. This was odd because whenever I wake up in the middle of the night, I usually feel wide awake. This time, though, I was utterly exhausted, as if something heavy had dragged me out of my sleep. Half awake, I glanced toward the short hallway and saw nothing. It was just dark. I put my head back on the pillow, closed my eyes, and lay in silence, teetering on the edge of sleep. Then, I heard the sound that jolted me upright, the creak of my bedroom door closing. I shot up, staring into the empty darkness of the hallway, frozen in shock for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I gathered the courage to get out of bed and check. Nothing was there. The hallway was empty, but a chilling realization dawned on me. I always kept that door shut, so how did it open? Shivers ran down my spine as I quickly locked the door and dove back into bed, telling myself it must have been one of my grandparents. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with a single reason why they'd open and close my door in the dead of night. Trying to shake it off, I lay back down and closed my eyes, the room engulfed in silence. Then, out of nowhere, loud, heavy footsteps echoed outside my door, racing toward my room. They sounded like heavy, barefoot steps, stomping forcefully and stopping abruptly right at my door. My heart hammered as I sat in bed, paralyzed by fear. Seconds passed, stretching endlessly, before the door slammed shut once again, violently. The door was already closed, and I hadn't even heard it open. I was frozen in pure terror, my heart pounding painfully as I sat completely still. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, instead sitting upright until morning, afraid to move. I didn't tell my grandparents about the experience. I didn't want to worry them. I just made an excuse to leave early, still shaken to my core. A few months later, I was staying over at a friend's house. Late at night, as I was trying to fall asleep on the floor with my body turned away from the door, I heard it again, the soft click of a door shutting. My eyes shot open. My friend was asleep beside me, and when I asked him about it the next morning, he had heard nothing. Since that night, I haven't heard the door sound again, and it's never happened at my own home. Yet, I feel as if I'm still being watched by some unknown presence, something not entirely of this world. The experience has left me constantly on edge, and each night I lie in bed, half paranoid, wondering if I'll wake up to something terrifying. If anyone can explain what I've been experiencing, or share a way to rid myself of it, I would be truly grateful, because even now, I fear that one day I might wake up to find whatever lurks in the dark finally making itself seen. I moved into a small apartment building last summer. It was a cheap two-bedroom place, really my only option considering the low-paying job I had at the time. The building was clearly neglected, and the room was no better. Mold had accumulated in several areas, and the whole place looked like it was barely holding itself together. But the one thing that stood out the most was the eerie emptiness, the absence of other residents. I'd lived in a few apartment complexes before, where it was rare to even find an available room. But here, almost all the rooms were vacant. It was a small complex with only 8 units, but during my entire stay, only 2 rooms were occupied. Mine and that of an elderly couple on the first floor. My room was on the 3rd floor, leaving the middle and top floors completely empty. Yet, despite this, those floors never truly felt empty. Within a month of moving in, I started hearing voices. It was as if people were talking below me, although I assumed it was just the older couple, the only other residents. Yet, something about the voice I heard didn't fit. I only ever heard a woman's voice, never a man's. Strangely, I could hear her voice clearly, even though she was 2 floors below. She seemed to mutter to herself in a low, indistinct tone, almost like a chant. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the dead of night to hear her murmuring. The sound crept through the silence, filling my room with an uneasy, oppressive feeling. I reasoned that maybe she was sleepwalking or that the ventilation somehow carried the sound up to my room. But things only got stranger as time went on. 2 months passed, and no new residents had moved in. One evening, I was walking up the stairs to my room when I noticed the door to one of the empty rooms on the 2nd floor was ajar. Curiosity got the better of me, so I took a few steps toward the doorway to peek inside. The room was dark and empty, just as I expected. But as I stood there, a chill ran down my spine. Something felt wrong. The kind of wrong that makes your skin crawl. I quickly turned and continued up to my room, but the unsettling feeling lingered. Later that night, as I took the trash out, I noticed that the door was now closed. I was sure it had been open earlier, but what could it mean? Perhaps the building owner was inspecting the room. That was the only reasonable explanation I could think of. Trying to shake off the lingering dread, I went to bed with a clear mind. But in the middle of the night, I awoke to the sound of the woman's soft, murmuring voice again. This time, driven by a growing unease, I climbed out of bed and placed my ear against the cold wooden floorboards, listening carefully. Her whisper was somehow closer, not 2 floors down, but right below me. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I realized the voice wasn't coming from the old couple's unit at all. An intense fear gripped me, yet a small part of me wanted to go downstairs to check if the door was open again. But fear won out, and I stayed put, trembling in my bed. Moments later, I heard faint footsteps pacing around the room below me. The voice continued, mumbling, pausing, then continuing again, as if she was walking in circles. Then suddenly the footsteps stopped. The silence was unbearable, as I no longer knew where she was or what she might be planning. I sat in bed, wide awake and paralyzed, wondering if the woman had left or was standing still somewhere below me. That's when I heard the floor creak again. This time not from below, but from above. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the room directly above me. The sound grew closer until they stopped just over my bed. I held my breath, heart pounding as the silence stretched on. Then, without warning, a soft, sinister whisper drifted down, barely audible yet sending chills up my spine. The whisper became louder, escalating into an agonizing scream that seemed to pierce through the walls, chilling me to the core. It was as if the voice was right next to me, screaming directly into my soul. The room fell silent once more, and I could only lie there, gripping my head and trying not to break down. I stayed up until dawn, my nerves frayed and my mind racing. As soon as daylight broke, I made arrangements to stay with my family. I paid the penalty to end my lease and moved back to my parents' house while searching for a new place to live. I returned only once to gather my belongings, and as I was loading the last few boxes, the older couple came out to say goodbye. We had barely spoken before, aside from quick greetings in passing, but they looked deeply saddened to see me go. Their sadness struck me as odd, given our limited interaction. During that brief conversation, I noticed something strange. The old woman's voice sounded completely different from the whispers I had heard. Her accent and tone were nothing like the unsettling murmurings that had haunted me each night. I left without mentioning what I'd heard, grateful to put that place behind me. Even now, I still shudder at the memory. Whatever presence lurked in that building, whispering and watching from the shadows, I hope to never hear its voice again.